Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, always hosting for our benefit a guest who is a communication expert. And as you listen to the discussion and as I listen to it, we will learn tips and strategies that will help us communicate with poise, persuasion, and yes, with profits. Today, I'm delighted to once again interview Karen Chase, based in the Boston area, a professional storyteller and a performing arts professional. Karen says, as a professional storyteller, I bring folk tales, fairy tales, legends, and myths to life. Her blog is appropriately entitled Catch the Story Bug. It's dedicated to the art of oral tradition. She's a columnist for National Storytelling Magazine. She's a book author, the title Story by Story. Now, Karen hasn't always been a professional storyteller. She started out in human resources, spent 4 years there, and then she heard a professional storyteller at a conference for children and youth. And then I want you to catch her vitality. She said, since then, I've been hot air ballooning over New Hampshire, swam with the sharks in Florida, flown into a dormant volcano in Hawaii, zip line through the jungle in Mexico. And then she says, but nothing excites me more than finding the right story. Well, we have certainly found the right person to talk to us about storytelling. So join me in welcoming Karen Chase. Hello, Karen.
Hello, Bill. As always, a delight to see you and speak with you. Thank you for having me today.
It's our pleasure and our privilege. Karen, many of us have probably never met a professional storyteller. Maybe we didn't even know they existed. So you can give us some insights on the profession and what you contribute to the field of communication. I want to start by getting some background here. How old is the art of storytelling? And what part did storytelling play in the development of our history, especially eventually recorded history?
Well, that's a fully loaded question to begin with. Storytelling began thousands of years ago, and we have evidence of that by finding cave drawings on cave dwellings in the Pyrenees. They found drawings that are over 35,000 years old. And as we move forward in history, stories were passed orally because many people did not have the talent to read or write. They didn't have the knowledge. So oral storytelling was the way things were done. And of course, I'm sure your listeners and you as well know the story of Scheherazade, who saved her own life by continuing to tell a new story for 1,001 nights.
That's a classic story, and
Exactly.
it's one of the early incidents, I suppose, of the power of stories.
Saved her life, and she is considered, a heroine in storytelling. But your reference to history, there is a wonderful article that talks about one of the things in the article about Alexander the Great. One of the reasons he was so successful is because back then he had been taught to read and write. And one of his favorite things to read was by it was Iliad. And when he went into battle, he took that with him, and he took lessons in battle and war from that story. And they say he slept with a copy of that story by his side every night. And so he went on to conquer many, many parts of the world, as you well know. So that's one way storytelling has impacted history along the way.
Okay, very helpful. Let's get to contemporary times. We have people who are active in business and professional life. What do they need to know about stories and how stories can explain what they do and promote what they do?
Oh, I love that you yourself use story all the time in your work, and I have learned so much from many, many of your business columns. One of the most important reasons to tell story when you are either giving presentations or meeting with people is because they can evoke empathy in the listener and make a connection between both of you. Uh, there is a study that they showed that if you are to give a speech with just statistics, only 5% of your audience will remember that. However, if you give that presentation and use story as well, 63% of people will remember what you said.
I can believe that. And I remember years ago reading a book. The title caught me, and I think that's one of the reasons I read the book and reviewed it. The title was Wake Me Up When the Statistics Are Over.
That's right. I have that on my bookshelf. A very, very good book. And it is so true. It makes a connection with people. And there is a psychologist and professor at Princeton, Yuri Hassan, and he gave a wonderful TED talk and showed how in a test, when they had a storyteller and an audience, and they connected them all to MRIs, their brains actually synced together when they were listening to the storyteller's story. The parts of their brain lit up in the exact same way. So it's a wonderful way to connect with people.
I agree with you fully about stories bringing empathy between the presenter, whether it's one on one or is one person with an audience. There's something else which we need to underscore, and that is it certainly compels attention, and you can't have empathy until you get attention. I go back to carrying the memory that you and I and many other children have when we would hear as very small children, "Once upon a time." And whatever we were doing, even if we were being disruptive, if a parent or another family member or a friend or a babysitter picked up a book and said, "Once upon a time," that grabbed our attention. And it's still the case. In fact, I would say this is why, and I want your comment on this, but I would think this is why when you go into bookstores, I don't know the exact percentage, but it seems to me that well over 50% of the books are fiction. Why? Because they're storytellers.
Right. That's right. And it goes along with the traditional way we perform stories. You have both good and bad characters. You have the arc of the story and the denouement, the end, the satisfying ending. Hopefully, I myself could spend a whole day in a bookstore. Just put me there in the corner, and I'm happy as a clam.
I'll bet you could because it's packed with stories. You have a television show. Tell us about what you do hosting a television show.
Well, I had this wonderful opportunity come to me in 2015 for Seekonk Channel 9, which is a town about a half hour away from me. I had actually been on there to tell some stories, perform some stories, and talk about my book. And they asked if I would be interested in hosting a children's program for stories because so many people think that storytellers just tell to children, which we do, but we also have a much wider audience. So I suggested that I host a show showcasing other storytellers and their work. Because so many tellers, they spread out, they tell in homeless shelters, they work with people in recovery, They work with teens at risk, and they love the idea. And so I invite different storytellers on once a month, and they have a chance to perform a story, either a folk tale or a personal story. And I get to interview them on a topic of their choice. And we had last year, of course, we had to cancel a lot of shows because of the pandemic. But next month, we're ready to roll again. And I'll be doing some in the studio and also some via Zoom.
Is this a weekly show?
No, it's once a month. I do it once a month.
Once a month.
And it's called the Story Cafe.
Okay, okay. Story cafe.
Yes.
That's what people like to do. They like to go into cafe and tell stories to each other. You, you alluded to something a minute ago when you said that professional storytellers don't just talk to children and young adults. What what is it? Why would conventions and associations and civic clubs, when they invite a storyteller, maybe as a keynoter or as a seminar director, what what do they want out of that, and what do you deliver?
Well, that depends on the client's needs, which is one of the first things, when I'm contacted by a client, as one of my first questions is, what is the conference or the conference about? What do you hope to accomplish by having me there? Is there a particular theme or topic you would like me to speak about, and perhaps have stories to complement the theme? So it all depends on the client. And sometimes I already have stories ready in my repertoire, and I presented workshops on many different topics. So sometimes I can draw from those. Other times it's starting from scratch, depending on their needs. And sometimes it's just a performance, with not take that back, not just, but a performance. And sometimes, as you say, it's a keynote. And other times it's they want a presentation. Then I have, different workshops in on branding. I have workshops on story play. So I try to merge both because of my business background. So I use that as well in my storytelling and my presentations.
And I suppose, like those of us who are professional speakers, trainers, and coaches, you've been deprived of the live audiences, the face-to-face audiences that we love, and I would imagine you've been using technology as we're doing now.
Exactly. The one, well, the positive thing about Zoom is that we can reach out to people that are beyond our geographical area, as we're doing now. And one of the performances I was able to do was with some children in Vermont at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, for them to have brought me there physically would have been a lot more expensive because of travel and lodging. But because we were on Zoom, it was the expense was much more palatable for them. I didn't have to think about those things. The downside is the energy. As a performer, you receive and give back energy to the audience, as you do when you give your presentations.
Oh, yes.
So it is, it's a little bit more of a struggle to perform on Zoom because you're not getting that
You have to use
interaction
your
that.
imagination.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And it does get easier the more you do it. It does become a little bit easier.
When I think about your television show, it reminds me of some of the favorites in the media of all time, and I would think those who would remember Edward R. Murrow, or those who would remember Paul Harvey, or those who would remember Earl Nightingale. That was the era when we had not just reporters, we had storytellers. And if you say to almost anybody, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story, they would know where that came from.
Exactly. I loved that show. Loved it. What a great memories of that.
Tell me this, you have to come up with stories, new ones. You can't just use the same ones. That would be dull to you and would not bring the new information. So how do you find new stories? I guess you're an avid researcher.
Yes, and a reader. They both serve me well. And going back to what I said before, depending on the client, depends on what type of stories I am looking for. If I am telling to a grade school or high school or adults, the stories will be different. For adults, when I am telling, if I'm not telling personal stories and I'm telling folk and fairy tales, they're a lot longer and more sophisticated. And it's always wonderful to see an audience of adults fully immerse themselves in story. There is something we call the story trance, and you can see people settle into that when you're sharing stories. So, depending on what the client's needs are, is how I begin researching. Of course, Google is fabulous, but I have a plethora of folktale and fairy tale books in my office, and I have colleagues I can reach out to if I'm struggling to find something that I need on a particular theme. Our network in the storytelling community is extremely supportive and helpful, and I like to think I return that to them as well.
Have time for just one final question. You mentioned at the outset, and I believe it was in the introduction too, that you help clients with branding. My guess would be that you help them come up with stories
Mhm.
that create a brand, sustain it, make it exciting, and make it something want people want.
One of the things we do along those lines, I have a colleague, Andrea Lovett. She and I work very well together, and we do workshops together. And we were asked by Harvard to come in and work with some entrepreneurs who had developed products and needed to market them. But of course, being in the scientific community, some of their presentations were lacking because it was more statistical based
More
on
data. Mhm.
exactly. So, what we did in the workshop was help them find the story from their lives that could be as a child that brought forth this particular product, this invention that they then needed to go out and secure funding for. And I remember one of the stories was from a woman in the workshop, and she was from Saudi Arabia. And she remembered that as a child, one of her friends in the neighborhood could not come out and play as the other children could because they were missing a leg. And she remembered saying, I'm going to help you one day. And her product was a brand new type of prosthetic leg that had much more flexibility. And she had forgotten about that time in her childhood until we worked with the group and using different story sparks, having them go back a little further in time, brought that forward in her memory. And of course, when working in a group, Andrea always loves to say, one story calls another. And it happens in daily life. You might share something, and when you're done, I'll say, I remember something similar that happened to me as a child. So, helping them reconnect with their memory and their past, they can usually find a connection to what they want to do or how they want to proceed or talk about a product. And that folds right into branding for them.
Fascinating, fascinating. All of this is, and I'm so happy you were with us today. I know people will want to contact you, so please give us your contact information.
Well, you can reach me through my website at storybug.net. I say net like you're catching a bug, storybug.net. And Karen Chase at gmail.com, as well as storybug at AOL.com.
I love that story bug. That's great branding right there.
There's a story behind that.
I'm sure there's a story behind it. And since you've kindly shared your contact information, I'll share mine. Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy. And so logically, my website is B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. I invite you to go there, check my services for corporations and leaders. Contact me. I'll be delighted to talk with you about your communication challenges and how I can assist you with them. Karen, any closing thoughts for us?
Well, I think my thoughts turn to the new year for all of us. And I hope your listeners and you as well have new possibilities in 2021. And may we all stay safe and well. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Bill.
Been a pleasure hosting you, and thank you for those good wishes for all of us. Thanks to Karen Chase, Storybug, for being with us today. Thanks to all of you who were with us on video or in the podcast. Be with us next week when again we will have a conversation, a lively, informative conversation with a communication expert. I'm Bill Lampton, your host.